I'm doing pretty good. Doing pretty good. Here are my fellow criminals and getting ready to discuss my personal favorite, Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips' book. So I'm doing pretty good.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. This is a new CriminalCast. I completely flubbed the beginning, so you didn't hear the opening. So that may have sounded weird when Skip introduced himself. But good to see you, Skip. Also joining me, one of the usual suspects is the incorrigible Eric Breen. How you doing tonight, Eric?
Did you ever name that other show yet?
What other show?
That other unnamed one?
Do I have a channel?
My bad.
It's good to have you here, Eric. You always keep us on our toes. And then finally, the main criminal, the man behind the schemes. You know him as Nalo. Nalo, how you doing tonight?
Well, unfortunately, I have to report I did get caught, but I did get internet rights in prison tonight. So happy to check in.
Oh.
So you're the not so smooth criminal because you got caught.
Yeah. Don't worry, I won't rat you guys out.
Well, we are here to do something slightly off of the criminal train, but very closely related. It's like kissing cousins, I guess, is that what you call them. But before we get started, one of my traditions on these things is always make sure you got a good frosty beverage to wet your whistle if you're doing a lot of talking like I am, or if you're just sitting back enjoying. Tonight, I got myself a... because it's a little bit different than the criminal where I drink bourbon. I was like, I gotta do something a little different. I'm doing a Bloody Mary tonight. I thought that was kind of fitting. Anyone else? What are you guys drinking?
The
Agua.
Diet Coke, agua. Skip, you doing some tea?
I thought about doing tea tonight, but I ended up, I guess, call me indecisive. I've got some like alkaline water and like 2/3 of a fruit punch Gatorade and a La Croix.
La Croix. Oh, very good. I guess I'm
over in New York. We just call them LaCroix.
That's what the fancy people call it. Okay.
No, that's what the non-French accent.
It's LaCroix if your pinky finger is still touching the can or bottle. It's La Croix when it extends. Isn't that correct, Ash?
Yeah, if you're a filthy American and you just don't have any class, you might call it LaCroix.
I'm both of those.
All right. Well, I'm shotgunning it, so I'm gonna call it LaCroix.
LaCroix. Oh man, very nice, very nice. All right, well, we got some usual suspects in the chat, so it's good to see all you guys here. Hopefully you guys read the book. You're not just letting us spoil, because we're not going to do a page-by-page spoiler. That's not in the plan. We're going to sit here and discuss this book, and this is a 12-issue series, and we're going to be doing the first volume of the trades, of which are 3, so it's only 4 issues. They're pretty sizable issues. I think it came out to about 120 pages total. But I got to say, before we really dive into the book, I now kind of understand why this is your favorite, Skip. I really enjoyed this book. The narrative style. This was the most challenging Brubaker book I've had to read so far. There were times where I was like flipping back and I was like, wait, did he just, is this a memory? Like, is this a flashback? Are we jumping back? Like what? And just the whole narrative was very complex, but it was very rewarding if you paid attention to it and dived into it. Am I just stupid, or do I have some element of any of you guys can back me up on this?
You're hitting some of it for me. Some of the reasons why I liked it. It was a lot of those things, and I'll say part of the reason why I thought and I was hoping why you would get into it is because for people who've been longtime listeners, and for me who I've been talking to you late nights and whatnot sometimes. We know you used to review films and do write-ups and stuff like that. So you were very interested in film. Not that you aren't now, but there was a period of time where you gave that a lot of your time and attention. Like, it's got all of those old Tinseltown trappings and about the film industry and some of the old inner workings of it, from the underbelly side all the way up to the stars and the red carpets and all of that stuff. So I was hoping that a little bit of that would hook you as well.
Yeah, I did. I very much like the Bad Weekend story, where it ties into the comics and the whole comic industry. The story itself is great. Even if I wouldn't have been a comic fan, it's great. But much like that story, that extra flavor really was cool to see, and I did enjoy that. What about you guys? Do you agree that this?
No, I don't think you're a dummy. I think we'll get into it, but this is a more challenging read, and part of that reason is because it's more of on the mystery side than just crime, and part of the mystery is our main character's memory itself, and so that very much is part of the book of like flashbacks and like dreams and like images from like a broken memory constantly appearing, and definitely messes with the narrative structure more than the other books.
Agreed.
How about
Breen?
you? How about you, Breen? How many times have you read this book now?
This is my second time through, and I read both of them, all 4 issues, a couple of times getting ready for this. Retained, unfortunately, not nearly as much as I would have liked, but I ain't smart like the rest of you guys, but one of the things I liked about this is it kind of reminded me, not in the plot, but Max Allan Collins wrote a series of novels with a main character named Nathan Heller. And what he would do is, Nathan Heller was a fictional character, but he put him in real life situations. He did one on the death of Marilyn Monroe when and in the story he's friends with the Kennedys and her. And I like stories that weave real life people in and out of a fictional story. And we see it a couple times in these 4 issues. When Gable shows up at that party, and then there's references to real life people like Bud Schulberg and people like that. So I'm a really big fan of stuff like that. So this story's right up my alley in subject matter and with the little real life Easter egg, so to speak.
Well, before I hand this off to Nalo, there's one last thing I want to address, and HR goes vocal in the chat reminded me of this, and I always forget to talk about it, even though I really want to. He said that the LA Noir soundtrack, LA Noir is a video game for those of you who may not be familiar. He said it went really good with this book, and I love audio accompaniments to my books. I myself listened to Hollywoodland, the soundtrack for that movie Hollywoodland with was our boy Batman, Ben Affleck was in it, Adrian Brody. I don't know if any of you have seen it, but I was like, oh yeah, it seems really appropriate here. So do any of you guys ever listen to music with your books?
Yep,
I will, as soon as I get a receiver again.
So it's a pause for Breen. Yes, I often play more often than not, I play instrumental music, and usually it's some sort of dream punk record, which is like futuristic ambient music, or I'll turn on the Villain 24-hour YouTube channel, which is a label that does a bunch of that. So usually the music that I'm listening to is pretty dramatic and whatnot.
What about you, Nalo? Do you like music?
Yeah, I think I've been asked this before, so mostly rocking some like Boards of Canada, Aphex Twin, ambient electronic music.
And Boards of Canada, nice pick, dude.
Well, I'm going to assume that not everyone watches every episode, so sometimes you may ask questions multiple times. But you and Skip, you guys don't really try to like pair your music. You just kind of just put on music that you just like, and no matter what the genre is. Would that be correct?
You can go ahead and go first, Nalo.
Pretty much.
For me, I tried to pair it, but in this particular instance, I I've already read it before, so I kind of know how I feel about it. So I went with music that I felt like matched how I feel about the book since reading it, as opposed to most of the time if I haven't read a book and I'm gonna set all that stuff, I'll usually match it to what I think the book, just like genre based or whatever.
Sure.
I guess like on what genre I feel like it is. But this time around, since I already know it's my favorite, so I just paired it with so I still wanted something dramatic. This is a dramatic book, so
Sure.
I just paired it with something that was dramatic, but that kind of already makes me feel the way that the book makes me feel when I read it.
Very nice. Well, I'm definitely going to try to remember the LA Noir. I don't think I've ever heard that soundtrack. So, HR, thanks for that suggestion there. When we do volume 2, I'm going to listen to it and see how that goes. I think when you match up good music and you sometimes you nail it and you're like, yeah, it just really, really does good. But let's go ahead and pass this over to our master schemer, Nalo, to facilitate the discussion and recaps of Fade Out, Volume 1. Take it away, Nalo.
All right, so as I already mentioned, we're discussing The Fade Out, and this book is set in Hollywood, 1948, with a noir film stuck on endless reshoots and a writer plagued by nightmares from the war. And then we have a movie starlet's suspicious death, a replacement with a suspicious past, a media mogul, and a security chief willing to do anything to keep the cameras rolling as the Red Scare and the blacklist of who may be a communist begin to tear the town apart. And so this book is primarily set around a movie studio. And I have the hardcover edition, and to add an extra layer, I actually received it from the Last Bookstore in LA. I realized when I got it. I ordered that too, Breen. I'm waiting for my issue 1 floppy.
Oh, very nice.
If you have the hardcover, you kind of get the cast of characters opening, and you see this book is full with a full set of like 24 characters, everyone from the photographer on the movie set to the blacklisted screenwriter to people's wives to the director, etc. Okay, 2 for 2. I was hoping mine would have come in the mail before today, but the guy said he needed a special package for the magazine shape.
You're both making me jealous.
All right, so issue 1 is called The Wild Party. And basically what happens in this issue is we get introduced to our main character, Charlie, the screenwriter. And we get introduced to him in 2 forms. 1, that he's traumatized by the war. And 2, that he's an alcoholic, as many of the people in this book are. And he essentially wakes up from a wild party the night before, and he really can't remember what happened. But what we do get to see is that almost every character that they show you in the hardcover actually appears in this book, and basically he can't remember at all what happened during that party, but everyone seems to remember him at the party, so he doesn't have much of an alibi, for example. And wherever he wakes up, he finds the main movie star of the movie basically found dead, and so he freaks out and runs away, doesn't want to be blamed, and goes to work. And throughout the day, as it comes out that she's been found dead, the movie studio starts to fall into shambles. The German director screaming about can't do any more reshoots. The people are fighting over who will be the replacement. And our main character, Charlie, finds out through this kind of very intimidating head of security that, this is going to be a tight-lipped, press can't hear about it, and they're basically going to frame it as a suicide for the press to keep this all under wraps. And that's our first introduction to the world of The Fade Out with a lot of different characters, and it's really kind of centered around this murder, the LA party scene, and everyone who works at this movie studio. So, what did you guys think of this first issue?
Eric, jump in, man.
Oh, Eric Green.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Skip.
I was pointing it to Ash, actually.
All right. Jeez, I have a tendency to monopolize the mic, so I really, I need help not to doing that. But this book grabbed me. A lot of times, in my limited experience with Ed Brubaker, he's a little bit of a slow burn. He does a lot of just sort of things happening, and you're like, okay, what's going on? Why are these? And then as it builds toward the end, all these pieces come together, and you're like, oh, awesome. But this one, right from the beginning, from the whole party scene. Well, sorry, not the party. When he wakes up in the bathtub after the party, and he's feeling kind of good, like, oh, he sees the lipstick on the on the mirror and stuff, and he had a good time, but something's not right, and he discovers a dead body of not just any dead body, but the star of this movie that he's part of that's currently filming. And he just realizes that she's been murdered. She's got strangle marks on her neck, and he's like, this whole time I was passed out. Whoever killed her did it like, I was like in the next room or whatever, and he's like, I can't call the cops. He just realizes like what a horrifying scene this is, not just because someone's dead, but because he's essentially implicated. I mean, no, I don't know if he was set up per se, but like he's really helpless. And I was just thinking about that the whole time. Like, what would I do in this situation? Because you call the cops. I mean, you're the number one guy. You're probably going to jail for murder. And I really like that scene. I like the cast of characters that it sets up. They're all very interesting. Ed Brubaker never fails, in my opinion, to deliver on the sort of the complex, wild, diverse flavors of characters. And they all pique your interest. This one immediately throws a ton of them at you. And it was a very stark contrast to the last book we did, the Reckless book, which was very straightforward, pretty much focused on Ethan Reckless. But that's not to say like in any sort of negative fashion. I loved it. So I'm going to stop now before I just babble on for eternity.
We all know that I love this book. I've been waiting to do this book for a long time. But a few things, like straight out the gate, I really enjoyed how we got introduced via like the Pearl Harbor thing and like Japanese planes flying over Los Angeles, and how there was rolling blackouts in Los Angeles, in a sense to shield them. So that way, precious sites, to the American military, to America, like, would not be as visible in case that, there was some attempted bombings and whatnot. And it was talk about how like there was rumors of it, and everybody just kept talking about how they saw planes in the sky and heard them, and everybody was thinking that things would get bombed, and how Charlie, who's the name of the writer that we're following, he was talking about how he never saw anything. All he ever saw that was up there were just stars in the sky, that basically people is usually hidden in the darkness, and then when the sky was clear enough, that's what was visible. And he said, but because because of the people are more prone to believe things like that here, it must be the air. And I liked that. I liked the whole using the what was going on at the time, other parts of the history, to kind of build what is the air of Hollywood, where we're in this place where people do a lot of acting in hopes of doing acting, on the silver screen. And things are so believable because what gets made the most of, the biggest product out of Los Angeles, is stories and facades. So I thought that was really cool how like he just built, that added to the mystery. Like, let me put you in a place where so many crazy things are happening, and there's already all these types of rumors and stories and make believe and whatnot is happening now. And then we kind of get dropped into the mystery not too long after that. So we're put in a state where people in the story are believing things, which in a way kind of beckons us to believe things, and then okay, now believe this terrible thing that has happened, and that I don't know what actually happened. So now we're like, we have to believe Charlie, and we'll find out, if we should believe Charlie more as the book goes. The other main thing about issue number 2 that I really liked is, we do get this up and coming starlet who is, gruesomely murdered from what we see from Charlie's recollection and what he experienced. And kind of the show must go on, as they say. So they want to continue to shoot the movie because they're in it. They're not doing great with money, and the director's like, we'll shoot around her scenes. And like one of the biggest stars that will, that's in the book that gets introduced early, Earl Rath, he goes straight at the director, and he, basically feeling like he's being insensitive and he's not respecting the tragedy. He's not respecting the life of this actress that had been taken, and that's his fellow coworker. So he kind of takes it to the director physically, kind of presses him for just kind of wanting the show to go on. Like the show should at least stop for a little bit longer and let us grieve and figure out what's going on. But the studio machine must go on. So those are two of the biggest things that I took away from issue number 1.
Green, anything you want to add about this issue?
Yeah. For me, this is the perfect illustration of what a giant illusion Hollywood was in the studio era when it was at its peak. Because it was such a land of make-believe that they even created make-believe versions of real life. When it's obvious the girl was murdered, of course, they sell it to the press as a suicide. And I remember it said, from stories I've heard, and no, I was not around then. It just they just gave off this illusion that everything was just, white picket fences, 2.5 kids, everything was fine. And I guess that's almost how they had to survive the Depression was, people would live vicariously through, their screen idols, in the movies. And it's just, I don't know. I said, it just, you just see, like I said, he does a great job of telling us what it's really like behind the scenes, yet showing us what the public was exposed to, which was, like I said, just everything is always fine. And just, I don't know if juxtaposition is the right word, but this is something he does very well, and this book was no exception. And so, did you guys know who Earl Rath is supposed to be?
No.
He reminds me of maybe Errol Flynn.
Oh, that makes sense.
I'd heard that he was, George Raft, but George Raft was never that nice of a guy. But now there's another one coming up. It's obvious who he is. I mean, Ty, anybody can figure out who he's patterned after. But we'll get into that. I know he has a cameo in issue 1, but he's.
We get it. We definitely get it. Nalo, what about you? You take away number.
Well, my main takeaway, this wasn't the first Brubaker book I read, but this was the book that kind of matched exactly in my mind what I think of as like a pulp noir story. All the way back from probably like some archetypes I've seen in like Rugrats cartoons or something. Sorry, I got some police action behind me.
They're coming for you, man.
Perfect timing.
They're coming.
And
for
so
you.
I think that I loved Brubaker and all these like criminal noir books, but this book actually kind of seemed like the perfect archetype for like pulp or noir. Just the fact that movie studios like Breen kind of brought up this like moguls and mysterious power up in the Hollywood Hills, and then you have all these like manufactured press. I really like the character like Dottie, who's like kind of keeping everything together, running the show, and just how you have even not revealed in this issue, but the whole government agents maybe be afoot, and who's potentially really funding all these movies at the end of the day, and who's really running those stories in the press on the other end of things, and what kind of mysterious forces are in the background. And for me, this book kind of seems like a serious precursor to Reckless in many ways. Both Volume 1 and Volume 2 seem to be like layer 2s of the Fade Out, kind of their own stories, but like they very much hit on the same themes. In Reckless 1, we saw that there were some shadow forces behind the scene, and Volume 2 that there were some movies. So this to me is just like the most classical kind of pulp thing that I would like think of if you were like, what was a pulp book or like a noir book? This one just kind of hits it all for me. So the first issue really dragged me in, same as you, Ash.
Yeah, and one other thing real quick. It also shows just how much synergy there was between like Hollywood and the press, and how as long as you gave them the scoops, they would play ball. And you realize, I said, most of the country never knew FDR couldn't walk. Most of the country had no idea that Babe Ruth was a lecherous drunk and used to chase women naked through trains while they were going from city to city, because they protected the star, the rich and famous at all costs to keep the illusion going. And that even went into through the 50s with people like Mickey Mantle, who was portrayed as an all-American boy, and most of the time he was so hungover that his first at bat was almost a wash. So
Yeah.
it's
I guess something I took from this based off what you're saying is like compared like in criminal books, it's all like the underbelly, like they actually hang out at the undertow. These are like the lowest level of the pecking order of society, where the fade out, it's like real power. Like you kind of get a sense of power. It's like really a look into like actual power that has serious effects on everyone that's not in that movie studio, but the rest of the country potentially, or world.
One thing that I liked that you can see I have on the screen here is this book had a cast of characters. And in my old age, I'm like, I would love that they did this on other books. We were just joking about
on the X-Men series. Haven't you been reading those?
Oh no. Don't throw a wrench in the spokes. You cause an accident. No, like we do the firepower on the Indie Comics Show, and I'm always forgetting the characters' names. And something like this, I guess I could just make my own. But it was really nice that started off like this, and I was like, oh, sweet. So I've left it up here just for the sake of the podcast here, just remembering some of these characters' names. I'm just not the best at recalling them anymore. I don't know. I just thought that was cool. But we can move on to the next episode or issue.
Cool. Let me just pull up the title of it.
Issue number 2, the death.
Okay, issue number 2, the death of me. So this issue, I just read it over recently. I see this as everyone got hooked on the first issue, and you kind of see this whole cast of characters. Issue 2 is kind of more of a transitory issue, so I'll just quickly say what I recall on the high level. You kind of begins with the serious fallout of this suicide, or rather loss of this famous character. So it opens up at the funeral, and you kind of get a sense of all the different undertones of either gossips or whispers of what have you. But I think the biggest takeaway from this issue is that you learn that Charlie, our famed screenwriter, young lad, actually kind of lost his creative abilities from the war. And you also get more insight into the Red Scare and this crackdown that you kind of heard about in the background of issue 1, and that his best friend or colleague, who was a good writer as well, essentially got on one of these blacklists and can't find work anymore for being accused to be a communist. And you find out that he's the one writing all of Charlie's work because he's kind of the face of the operation, and his friend Jill is upstairs drinking and writing out all the scripts. And we saw in issue 1 that Charlie was so disturbed by this kind of cover up and the moral ethical line of saying it was a suicide when it was a murder. So he tells his friend, and he realizes that's probably the beginning of the end for all of us, because he's let a loose cannon loose, and his drunken friend kind of runs out, and you kind of get a sense he's about to be a chaotic piece of the puzzle going forward. So those are the main things I think happen in this book. But what did you guys think of the issue? And feel free to fill in what I missed.
Well, if I remember correctly,
I'm gonna jump in on.
It's traffic jam. What do we do? Go, Skip.
No. I was asking. I was telling Breen.
Okay, I was just gonna say, if I remember correctly, wasn't Charlie the one that was under suspicion, and Gil took the rap for him?
Yes, you probably remember better than me.
So he got blacklisted, and then they worked it out. That way, I guess he didn't have the pressure on him in the publicly, just behind the scenes, and that might be why he's drinking himself to death, and why his wife probably wants Charlie now. And so that's that's something that I took from that issue, issue 2. Go ahead, Scott.
Well, thanks for filling that out. Just because the friendship there, I think, is one of the chorus parts of the book going forward. Once it gets introduced in this issue.
Yeah, it was really interesting to me. Like,
Absolutely, I agree. Like
go Skip. Hey, I think we're got a delay.
Well, I think we might have a little bit of a delay, but I was just gonna say that their relationship, you see, like as the book goes on, and naturally, but even beyond my expectations, you see how like deep rooted and let's say how invested, how into it they are, both Charlie and Gil. They have ties that bind them like deeper than some of them, and one of them realizes it, and we'll see as that goes on. Actually, even kind of both of them to a degree. But one of the things that I wanted to point out here is, again, in the beginning, they do a really good job of setting the tone for the issue, especially like thematically. And this started out, as Nalo said, at like, picking up where they left off. We're actually at the funeral now. So we're experiencing like the fallout from this starlet Val Summers, being gruesomely murdered, but it being passed off as a suicide. And the narration talks about how Charlie can't tell who is actually grieving at the funeral and who's acting, because the press and whatnot are there taking pictures, and they don't want it. They want to seem like they're just as, emotional about it as the most emotional person there. So again, like the actors all have their roles, and this is the height of where people portray things. So it makes it that much more difficult to tell who is authentic and who isn't. And that's a hell of a thing to have to deal with in the midst of a murder mystery. I love that. This Ash is gonna work right into you. You just finished flipping through, for everybody that's watching and not just listening, you just finished flipping through issue number 1. You are into issue number 2 now. I point out that Elizabeth Brightweiser's colors take on a whole nother personality and really set the tone and make themselves known out the gate from issue number 2, far more than in issue. Did you notice that? I know you talk about colors and not always like, feeling too many ways about the art, but for you to take it away, did you notice anything about the colors, even just from issue number page number 1 of issue number 2?
I didn't notice anything about the colors, to be honest, transitioning from issue number 1 to 2. But what I did notice was, reflecting back on a conversation we had maybe like a month ago, where I said that I liked, what's his name? Phillips's son. Jacob Phillips. I liked his coloring.
Oh, Sean Phillips. Or Jacob Phillips. I'm sorry.
Jacob. Yeah. But I also had admitted I hadn't seen a lot of Brightweiser's colors on Criminal, so this was nice to be able to reflect and see. And I was keeping in mind, and I was like, this issue, she is a lot better than I recall. So I would have to reevaluate that. But no, I wasn't noticing necessarily what you may be referring to from issue 1 to 2.
I didn't notice any change either, Skip, so I'd like to know what you have to hear. But one general comment I feel about Brightweiser, after most recently reading more of the Phillips coloring, is that I think there's like more colors used per panel.
Yeah, she seems to have a broader...
There might be like 5 or 6 or 7 colors in one single panel, where with the other colorist, Jacob Phillips or something, there might be only like 3 colors used per panel or something like that. I'm exaggerating, but it just seems like more types of colors are used.
Yes, I would agree.
I would agree, and as I say, like, and maybe as we go through this book, especially the other 10 issues that we kind of take note of that. This is like a meta thing for the CriminalCast, since we cover a lot of criminal books, and Jacob Phillips has done cover quite a few. I think Val Staples as well, but Jacob Phillips got a lot of his coloring style, and at least for the criminal book, and I even saw some of it in that Texas Blood, it's not exactly the same, but you do kind of see him pick up where Brightweiser left off, so there's not such a difference in feel apart from just the line art from the previous Criminal books to where he picked, to where he became the main colors. And then as you kind of continue and transition along, you see him start to kind of pull away from it and kind of use different brushes and shapes. And yes, he does use fewer colors, but that's part of the reason why I like Brightweiser, because she uses more colors. I think she uses them in a way that is, I'll just say this, it's prettier. It comes off just naturally prettier while not taking away still from the grittiness and the tone of the books.
Yeah, it may
But Ash,
be
what are some other
it may
things
be
you
that I
got
end
from
up
it?
changing my mind, as I get more comparisons between the two. I very much do love the coloring in this book, and I do appreciate the broader palette, more colors, because this is not a seedy underworld story, right? It's Hollywood, and the prettier aspect that you kind of mentioned, I think, lends better to it than stories that are in dark alleys and people getting shot in bars, and I don't know. It's a give and take for me. I guess what I like about Jacob Phillips is the use of his colors. He seems to go with more vibrant colors, simpler coloring, but more vibrant, more shocking, like emotional. Like it's kind of like the difference between like in a musical score. You can have a very complex, tons of instruments, or you can have a very simple, like one of the most famous scores of all time, Jaws. Like dun dun dun. It's just hitting those right notes sometimes, and that's just, I guess, a personal choice. But I am definitely keeping my eye out since we've been talking about this and just trying to notice it more and digest it.
Well, since you brought it up, sorry, go ahead, Bree.
So with all due respect, Mr. On Comics, I was going to say I think this book illustrates just how, even in the glitz and glamour of Hollywood, the human behavior can be just as seedy and untoward as every other book he's done. It's just the set pieces are nicer.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really great. I was going to say something similar, but in the context of color, because I wasn't thinking about it much until Skip brought it up. But just my overall intuitive description of the feeling and colors of this book is that point that Breen, you brought up, that they believe in their own stories so much they start making up stories and realities. I feel like just overall the art and color gives you this vibe of almost floating on air, with people just smiling and embracing people taking their photo, and then at the same time living hell, and this guy thinking about just the worst shit happening and paranoia, and somehow the book through its colors gives you this kind of floating in a fake reality and then serious anxiety at the same time.
So one thing I just wanted to say about this issue, because I hadn't said anything yet about it, that I really that took me by surprise in a pleasant way, and I like when a writer can kind of surprise you with the storyline. In the first issue, Gil is kind of portrayed as this asshole, and he's on the outs, what they call him, persona non grata, and you get the impression, at least I did, that the main character here, whose name I'm already forgetting, they're just enemies.
Harley.
And obviously you come to find out that they're really good friends, and we have the scene here, when he reflects back when he was the new kid in town and Gil was the old pro, and Gil is kind of his mentor. Gil's the guy that gave him his break. The whole reason he's in Hollywood is a lot to do to Gil, and I really respected this in the main character because I'm a big fan of loyalty. It's a huge thing for me, and even though Gil is a drunk and he's doing all these dumb things, this guy recognizes what he's done for me. I will never forget that. I'm never, and even talks, there's a scene in the book too where he's like, even if Gil is a communist and I hate communists, it doesn't matter. He's going to overlook it. Because that's how much he means to him. And even though he kind of sold him out, it was because Gil suggested it. Hey, you sell me out, only one of us goes down this way. And then, they work behind this, like they work in secret, which we've already talked about, where one does the writing and the other one's the face, because he's traumatized from World War II. And they talk in the story about how he just lost whatever it was that made him a writer. They say, like, went away, which I found that was interesting too. All these characters in a Brubaker books are always like these complex characters, and it's not complex where Brubaker spends a million years describing how complex they are. Just in a few words, like one little word bubble, you can get it. Like, oh shit, he's got this history in World War II, and the trauma. They show just a couple pictures of planes going. Oh, that's later. They show some bombers going down when they were doing a documentary, and just like you just imagine the trauma, and that's it. It's so. His writing is so elegant. He can say so much with so little, and I just love that.
Well said.
That's all I have to say on issue 2. Anyone else got any thoughts on issue 2?
And that's the bottom line, because Ash said so. We ready for issue 3?
Yeah. Is it called The Other Blonde, or The Other Actress, or The Replacement? Something.
The replacement blonde or something like that?
Replacement Blonde. Let me just check.
Page 63 of the graphic novel, if you have it.
I was just checking her name on that handy dandy cast of characters. So this issue primarily focuses on Maya, who's the replacement blonde. But at the very beginning of the issue, kind of gives some sort of lore on Victor Thursby, who's the co-founder of Victory Street Pictures. I might be messing up this summary, but essentially shows something from the past of the movie studio, where he this head of the studio just like gives up everything, drives to the desert, and just starts doing drugs and having sex. And this is now the second time that we've done a CriminalCast of the Brubaker book, where it seems to be a direct analogy to the film Inherent Vice by Paul Thomas Anderson, as well as based off the novel, same name, by Thomas Pynchon, where this kind of like real estate mogul decides to give away all his money and start doing drugs, and then like kind of the powers that be reel him in and throw him back into rehab and say, like, you can't do that. You got to keep the show running. And this book on the back is kind of about people doing whatever it takes to keep the cameras rolling. So you get some kind of insight into the kinds of people running this movie studio. But primarily it focuses on Maya and her kind of becoming this replacement. And she kind of has some interactions with her co-star, Earl, the dashing leading man. And I guess I want to hear more of your guys' take, and I don't have the tightest memory on this one, but when push comes to shove, Earl decides to give her some serious advice how to deal with this Victor Thursby, and it's real creepy because it seems like her dressing room or office has like a closet tunnel into his office, and I think towards the end of the issue he comes in to talk to her, and Earl had gave her some tips, I think, to maybe shave her whole body or something to that effect, and just give him what he wants right away and just like strip naked. And it's a trick because like making her look like ridiculously young, so he's just like ashamed of himself and just runs away, so she kind of gets off safe and not having to do anything compromising. But you find out she isn't as kind of starlit as she may seem in the press, because she has some sort of like Mexican ex-husband who may be drunk or violent or something to that effect. But as the new lead, she finds out that studio security is going to be following her wherever she goes. So those are the main things I remember from this issue. What did you guys think of it, or what did I miss?
No, I know. Says I love the scene where where Maya and Valerie are both sitting in the waiting room waiting to be called to audition for the role that Maya was promised by her agent, but that obviously Val ended up getting. And as far as the ex-husband, if Maya's going to be a star, she can't have the baggage of a Mexican husband, because in those days it was all about the illusion. And so he was paid off to go away and then came back. And then, of course, he went true to form and smacked her again. And of course, that's when what's his name, when Brodsky's there and lays the smacketh down on his candy ass. But it's just and what I liked about this book is having 12 issues. You could take an entire issue and not use the two main characters because you were doing backstory on other people important to the plot.
Yeah, it felt a little bit like
a
little bit like Cruel Summer in that respect for me. How Cruel Summer could like deviate around. I know that was for different reasons, but I think that was approximately 12 issues as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and well, so Criminal 2019 was 12 issues, but
it was actually 9 for the story because there's the 3 issues, 2, 3, and 4, right? Or 2 and 3 we talked about that veered off in a different story.
Right. 2 and 3 were Bad Weekend, and then 4 was a story about Ricky Lawless as he was older. But to Ash's point, like because we have a discussion like why were there 3 issues not in Cruel Summer when that was the 2019 run, and then those are the reasons. But I really loved that Ricky issue, that issue number 4, and it reminded me, this had already been, the Fade Out obviously came out before Criminal did, but I like what Ash is talking about, how you could take a whole, like that's why it felt natural. It within the 2019 run, it didn't feel out of place because this is a character that we had followed along for so long. In this particular case, we're getting introduced to this character, but since Brubaker had already honed skills, this didn't feel like, oh, we're just off on some weird tangent. It still felt very much in line with, like what we had already gotten, 2 issues before, or in the first 2 issues.
Yeah, real quick, HR bring up that the Silvers also slept around, but they can hide that. You can't hide an abusive husband, especially if he doesn't look like someone that would be married, that should be married to a blonde-haired, blue-eyed starlet. So one's a little easier to control. At least that's how I took it.
Right, and it was almost expected. Like one of the terrible parts and tragedies about the industry at that time is that it was kind of known for the most part that those types of things would happen, and for the most part, most people would turn a blind eye to it. The only person that would have had a problem with it that is close to Maya would have been her husband, which even he probably know. I mean, he did know.
Yeah, in fact, that scene where he smacks her, and again, this is one thing I love about Brubaker because he never puts things, or he rarely puts things hard and concrete. He kind of leaves things for up interpretation. And my interpretation was not necessarily that he was an abusive husband necessarily per se, but in this particular case, he's a guy pushed to his breaking point. Like, he's sitting here, he's got this wife that he loves, she's going off to be a starlet. They both kind of understand the under the table stuff of like what it means. She's going to sleep her way around to get, the breaks and different things. And then, she throws in the fact, to him in his face that you took the money and left. And he's like, well, yeah, of course I took the money. That's what you wanted. Like, he's like in a no-win situation. Now she's throwing it in his face and he just kind of loses it here. And, she's mad, and she's obviously cares more about, in my perception, she cares more about being the Hollywood starlet than her own husband. And he feels that rejection. And, you can see here where he says, you took the money and ran. And he's like, that's what you wanted. And, you wanted me out of the way. They all did. And she's just like, you took his money. Like, just still putting the blame all on his shoulders. Like, she's didn't do anything wrong. And he's like, because you were already...
Ash, could I just comment on something?
Yeah.
There's just something about Phillips' artwork with a certain type of woman, and I'm seeing it in Maya, and I think in like Heroes Always Be Junkies and some of the criminal ones. There's like a type of woman he draws where like her shoulders are like kind of like really uptight and like, but also bulky, and I think it's like a default stressed position or something. I'm just noticing the way Maya looks in this conversation looks similar to a few other women I've seen portrayed in Brubaker's works, and they kind of look like stocky and stressed, but in other scenes, those characters look more like skinny. So it's just an interesting thing. While I was watching you flip through,
I was literally on the last page of this issue, and I was thinking the same thing. It's so crazy that Nalo mentioned it.
I'm gonna have to keep my eye out for that. And just real quick, just wrapping up the scene. She's like, but a man doesn't sell his wife. And he says, no, everyone else gets to do that, you know? And they're just, these two characters have been pushed to a point of no return, right? Where they now have like wounded each other so badly that they don't really have a way back. And, you know, it's just one of those really tragic things, for me at least. I guess everyone has different life experiences. You may take it away, you know, way differently. She just tells him, just leave. She's got places to go. And she says, last thing she says, forget about me. And he's like, never. And this last closing part of the scene showed me, like, yeah, he did some bad things. Like, he's not a perfect guy for sure. You know, I don't believe in hitting women type thing, but, you know, I just see him more of a guy who broke down and, you know, he instantly was regretting everything he was doing. He just lost control, but he still loves her, and he's got no way out. Like, everything has been taken from him. He's got no play in this. He never had a say, but yet she now uses that to build hate towards him so she can leave with a semi-clean conscience. And then, of course, now here's the studio to clean things up. And it's just like, damn. And it just right back to what Erica said. To me, like, I was like, yep, this is like the dirty underpinnings of, you know, it's glitz and glam and everything's all great. And it's like, no, this is what it really is.
it really is like this, though. That's the part that's so shocking.
And the other thing, too, I find very interesting. I didn't notice it first until we started going over the book. She still has her wedding ring on at the beginning of this issue.
Oh wow, that's a really good call.
And Valeria tells her, like, "Oh hey, don't forget to take off your wedding ring." And she's like, "Oh thanks, wish me luck." And she's like, "I'm not that nice."
So much good writing in this.
Yeah.
Well, it is an Eisner Award-winning book.
I forgot that, but it makes sense. It's definitely worthy of it.
God, the Eisners have taken a swan dive since 2014.
I know.
Well, let's not get sidetracked.
That's a stream for another day.
I'll be a hangout stream. I'll join that one.
But yeah, I kind of see what you're saying here about the shoulders.
It's like I would have to go back. Oh well, Skip helped me out, but I think I own almost every Brubaker hardcover by now. I'll share a photo, but I'll have to go back, and I just know there's like 3 to 4 instances of this like rounded stocky shoulder syndrome.
Yeah, well, I mean, almost here on this page you can see the dichotomy from the top panel. She's got the rounded and then at the end she's got the blocky shoulder. I don't know if this is exactly what you're referring to, but
that shows it. But I think in some of the scenes before it was more intense. I think it's just the only thing I've noticed from the Phillips art that's like some sort of pattern and something like out of the ordinary. Just personally,
this scene,
Heroes Have Always Been Junkies has it too.
This scene just really got me. Like I've just known women to do this, and they will just turn you into an enemy to separate things. And you can see here and then the very last thing, eventually she sleeps like a baby. She knows what she's doing is terrible. She just knows, but she will sacrifice her husband for her own conscience. This is crazy. Anyways, moving on.
I mean, I was gonna say you changed, how I interpreted that now after you laid that out. She's a bitch.
Oh yeah, I got some commentary on that for the next issue.
I'm ready for the next one if y'all are.
I am.
The word on the street. All right, I'll do my best to just high level it, so we can do the most to spend the rest of our time discussing it. So here we're at the close of the issues we're going to be covering. Correct me if I'm wrong, but these are in the first trade in the floppy trade paperback edition. Is these first 4 issues?
Yes, Volume 1, also called Act 1 of a three volume set.
Oh, great film, perfect. So I think here things really start to come together, and you really start to see where things might be going ahead. And I think for the first time we get to see Earl and Charlie spend some personal time together. And there's a big gala or film opening, what have you, coming up that all the cast of characters will be attending. And Charlie's a little bit like, Dottie, that, power secretary woman asked me to be your date. Is that a real offer? Is it just a work thing? And, Earl's just like, I don't know, roll with the punches. He's like, I got an errand to pick up. I think the guy's name was Stevie or something.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, you gotta pick up some goods. And some sort of like safe house of like, Playboy-esque photos of all these celebrities. So here we're already getting this kind of classic postmodernism, David Lynch, where everything looks rosy in the suburb town, but there's a deep underbelly that's hidden. And so Earl the dashing man is clearly into these kinds of things. And you also get a peek into, the movie studio empire's kind of secret activities and, who's really taking these photos, where are they taken, etc. Those kind of questions come to mind. And while they're there, there's a photo with the president, Ronald Reagan, etc. But there's a man in the photo that Charlie basically sees, and it unlocks some memories. So there you get one of those abstract kind of memory scenes. That guy, ? Why does he know that guy? And that's one of these kind of like abstract memory scenes, which you don't see. And it gives him some kind of knowledge ultimately about the party. He gets a sense that he met that guy at the party, but, on to the actual party of the night. And that's where I had those commentaries about Maya. She's clearly the life of the party. Everyone's taking photos of her, wants to be with her. So she's starting to take over this new persona as, the new star. And it's kind of unclear if it's a real date or not. I don't know who's punching who and what I'm seeing here.
Oh,
Is that
if I may,
Yeah,
the studio sets her up on a date with what's the guy's name?
some other
Tyler
actor.
Graves.
Tyler Graves, the young dude.
Because he's the pretty boy. It's something that was done all the time back then, and obviously what I was saying before, to quote the Clash, that's Montgomery Clift, honey, because it's obvious if you read the book he's gay, and that's the line says the press left and so did Tyler, but he to put on the illusion, they said Ava Gardner left him because he wasn't enough man. So it served 2 purposes. He got to show that he was manly by punching the guy, and it was the whole thing was a setup to make him look macho for the cameras and to give the illusion that they were together. So that's what's going on there. I mean, go ahead.
Hello?
Yep, sorry, I was muted. Yeah, thanks for filling that in. I remember that in general, but I forgot the details of that here. So whatever the party is happening, I'm trying to remember what happens. But I do know that at one point Charlie and Maya kind of meet outside the party, and he's kind of like, you've changed or something to that effect. She's like, you haven't paid much attention to me, and he's like, okay, and she's just like, everyone's supposed to be paying attention to me now, and we kind of see her, let go of her ex-husband and is now, really embracing the stardom and this and narrative about her. I don't remember the details of these kind of war flashbacks, but from what I do remember of the core summary is that, Charlie and Maya start to hit it off and actually dance at the dance, and Dottie, is convincing herself, like, I didn't think it was going to be a real date, of course, but she's actually, a little bit hurt that this big star is now dating with the dopey screenwriter. Nothing really comes from them, going for a dance, but he kind of just keeps drinking and throwing up, and something's really bugging him, and ultimately it's that guy that he saw in the photograph at Stevie's place, and he just knows that it's, you know, related to something, and it unlocks even a memory of some gossips and whispers that there's, you know, federal agents on set who are reporting back, who are making these blacklists. And so in the middle of the night, Charlie's like, I got to go back to that, you know, safe house with all the porn photos where I saw the photo of that guy, and he runs there in the middle of the night, and the place is just literally on fire. So, you know, what are the chances? And I think that's also kind of a parallel to Reckless Volume 2, where Reckless runs back to where the films were for that kind of cult, and it's the guy is already kind of stabbed by the time he gets back. And he's just like, you know, shit.
Good pull.
And so, yeah, we can go back on what I missed, but ultimately, he sees that guy then at the scene in the car taking photographs, and he's just like, what the fuck, shit? And it just ends with the perfect line that, if I bought this as a trade, Act 1, as maybe you did, Ash, like, what a way to end an Act 1. And it says, and for the second time since he found sorry, I'm stuttering. The actress lying dead on her living room floor, Charlie feels the ground drop out from under his feet. What the hell has he stumbled into? And I guess I like Act 2 and 3 better, just because you get to stumble into, you know, the conspiracy of, you know, federal agents and perverted movie moguls, the press, and all the interpersonal drama of this very large cast of characters that we get to see. So, yeah, that's what from the book as a summary, to the best of my memory. Maybe we'll start with you, Ash, as the first-time reader. How did you feel ending Act 1?
It was the first time that I've ever read a Brubaker book without finishing it, right? Because there's still 2 more acts to go. So it was very interesting in that respect, because normally it's like, oh, like the whole story is done. I went through Act 1, 2, and 3. Now I've only done Act 1. But this is a really solid way to pull off an act. And it's great for anyone who might be a budding writer or whatever. I think this is just a very great example of how to do an Act 1. I'm not going to get too much into the whole theories of a 3-act structure or anything, but I very much look forward to the next book, because understanding what an Act 2 and 3 are, and I just it has me on the hook. Like, I am firmly that thing is in my mouth and ain't coming out without pliers, and I'm being reeled in.
So detailed, man.
Real quickly, the military thing that you couldn't recall very clearly, that was just a part of the scene where he name drops, Clark Gable comes by in the party, and just says hi to him. He's like, "Hey, Clark, what's going on?" You know, and they're just talking like they're old chums. He's like, "Hey, come over to my party. Houston and Bogey are over there," and the actor that he's with, what's this guy's name? I already forgot.
Earl Rath.
Earl Rath. He's like, "Are you shitting me?" He's like, "What?" It's like, you know Clark Gable? You know, it's like the big movie star doesn't even know Clark Gable, right? And so he says, "How do you know Clark Gable?" And so that was the whole scene. He's like, "Yeah, you know, I did some movies with him, and Clark Gable joined the war effort and everything, and they did a documentary." And this is where it's a little bit of a backstory to Charlie about like why he can't write anymore, because of the experiences he had overseas and doing his film, and seeing people die, and just, you know, having his whole world just awaken to the realities and the horrors of the real world. That, you know, imagine a kid who's in Hollywood, which we were talking about, the whole theme of this book is one giant illusion, right? I mean, how even more to be detached from reality than to be in Hollywood. And so that was what that was about.
A quick aside about Clark Gable. You know, he never truly got over Carol Lombard's death, because even though on screen he was the leading man of Hollywood at the time, he was their marriage was legit, truly based on love. And when she was killed in that plane crash, he never really got over it. But the way he's portrayed in this issue as being legitimately a nice guy, that is also true. There's a story when his last movie, and ironically it was also Marilyn Monroe's last movie, The Misfits, they were filming out in the desert, and Sinatra was there, performing with some at the same time. And Sinatra was not the nicest guy in the world in those days, or any days, but he wanted to throw a party for the important people of the cast from the movie. And Gable asked him, he goes, well, are you going to invite the crew? And Sinatra said, fuck them. They're nobodies. And he goes, well, if they're not going to be invited, then I'm not coming. So Sinatra opened it up to the entire crew.
Oh, wow.
Dang.
Interesting little behind the scenes knowledge there. That it's pretty cool because both Sinatra and Gable are mentioned in this book. So
I heard that Frank Sinatra has a cold.
That sounds like Reckless number 3.
No, it's actually a really famous journalistic story where the journalist wanted to like write about Frank Sinatra, but he couldn't ever get access to him. He spent like a month just like following his entourage, and then all he could learn about Frank Sinatra was that Frank Sinatra has a cold.
Well, Sinatra by the late 40s and early 50s, his career was dead. And he literally had to beg his way onto the cast of From Here to Eternity. And he won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor in that movie. And that put his career back on track.
Yeah, Hollywood loves a comeback. HR in the chat makes a comment that Sean Phillips is very good at body language, to which I very much agree. I think it's one of the strong suits of him in doing the art for these books, because, criminal books, which I know this is not officially a criminal book, but it's related. They're not really about drawing human anatomy and spandex, right? They're just about humans and drama. And that body language is a very big part of the story. And this was just a panel that I saw his thing, and you can tell here that the girl, what's her name, Julie? I forget.
Dottie.
Is it Dottie?
Dottie.
Dottie.
Jesus, I'm like, oh yeah, because she's the PR girl, and you can just tell here, like, because this is the whole bit of these several scenes are like, is it a date? Is it not a date? And like neither one really seems to know. And you can just tell here early on, just from the body language, that she's into him. Like, this is a date, but he's too stupid, or at least too oblivious to catch on.
Yeah. That's so real life.
Yeah,
she's expecting it to be a date. He doesn't get it. Yeah, I don't think he's not interested in Maya, other than that he just kind of falls into a dance with her, and this leaving this poor girl heartbroken, crying her eyes out. Of course, it wasn't a date, stupid. I mean, that is so real life.
It does feel so real that like that's the way that the random guy, Four Eyes guy, dances with the movie star, is because he didn't think he was on a date, and he's in the courtyard, and she's a movie star and needs to catch a break, so she goes to the courtyard. Then they wind up dancing, and then the secretary misinterprets it like, of course he goes for the movie star instead of me.
And he's not starstruck or anything like that, because he was good friends with Valeria, but it just happens, and poor Dottie's just screwed, and not in a good way.
Yeah, you can totally see like the self-consciousness, right, of a woman in her position being around Hollywood stars, and just constantly feeling not good enough.
Yeah, even when Earl makes that little crack, when she's coming out of the house, and she says something like, what, she turns into a swan or something, she goes, shut up, Earl.
Yeah.
And
the fact that Dottie is the one orchestrating all these PR events to where these stars and starlets are getting that type of attention so people can love them. So add that to, she's not as beautiful as them, yet she's the one setting the table for them to be able to eat the way that they do by setting up all these PR events, orchestrating it. So that just adds to the tragedy of her pain, and how she feels amongst all this.
And the funny thing is Charlie probably would have been interested in her, but he goes in from the get-go of like, it's probably not really a date. It's just a thing. And so he's just not even like, he's not even tuned into the right frequency. So he can't pick up anything that's going on.
They show that previously where they're talking about those parties, the party he went to where I think he ate it out. And he's like, oh, no, you don't want to go there. It's not really your scene. And she's like, no, what else am I doing? I'm going home. Right. I would love to go to a party with celebrities. What do you think?
And something else, if you'll notice, you know that if Charlie wasn't dense as a forest, that he would be into Dottie, because there's the scene with Gil's, soon to be ex-wife. They're very similar.
Yeah.
In looks and personality, and you can tell that Charlie definitely has an affection for Gil's wife. Platonically, if not in a different, if things have been different in more than a platonic way. So, yeah, it's like, this guy apparently needs two houses to fall in on him.
Yeah, and Charlie has his own soon-to-be ex-wife. So it's just like all of it,
I just want to say that, like, we could speak 3 times as long on just these 4 issues, and it's just the bar is set so high somehow with Brubaker, where so many other stories that are not like superhero based but grounded in reality just like don't reach this bar in any way or form.
It's true. This really is just like top tier writing, from the characters to like, that's what I was talking about, the level of relationship that we'll really find out that Charlie and Gil have even deeper. It's all so intertwined and also woven in, and he sets the characters up, and then like they immediately start moving, and you look away, and then you look back, and you're like, oh my gosh, like if their movements had trail lines to them, they'd all be intersecting in some of the most interesting and elaborate ways. But when you read through it, it does not feel like a chore to keep up with.
I think that it'd be, once we finish, maybe Ash, would be really cool to hear your insight, but like, I know Woody Allen is not the most delightful character these days, but just to reference him, he has older movies that people say are his best because they're, detailed and long. And then he has newer movies that are short and quip. And all the reviewers, when I read them, are like, he's lost his touch. But I actually really enjoy those later ones because they're just like quick and fun and tight. And that's how I'm like feeling in relationship to the Fade Out and like Reckless, in that, the Fade Out is so, every panel I could have on my wall, it has so much meaning. He's done all like the world building of this world, and I think Breen touched on it very heavily, of just like about the press and the relationship and the fake imagery, that it gives room later in the career where you don't have to go deep into that lore, and you can just have a guy with like a freaking crowbar hitting someone in the head and have it be more like an action book.
I'm gonna have to regretfully admit that I do not like Woody Allen movies.
Well, I was just trying to make an analogy of.
I know, I appreciate it, and I feel a little ashamed because I know he's much beloved by the movie aficionado crowd, but he's never done it for me. So unfortunately I can't relate to it on that direct aspect. But I understand otherwise what you're saying about how tight. In fact, the whole time I'm reading this book, and I think this might be a good way to wrap up the cast here, is I was thinking, God, this is like, I want this to be a movie. Like, I don't necessarily like the film styling. Like I don't like the directorial style and the whole way films were done pre like 1950s or 50s and before. Like the older you go back, I think it's harder for me to digest. It's just, call it because I'm more of a product of the new or what have you. But I think film has evolved over the decades. And now that I am such a child of the evolution, it's harder to go back to the pre-stuff. And I can appreciate it for its historical value and for its influence on the medium, but they're just not as entertaining for me to watch. And when I read a book like this, it's so cinematic for one, but also I'm like, Brubaker has taken me back in time. He's doing an old style noir film from like the 40s, but it feels like a fresh voice. It's not done exactly in that style. And I was like, I do love those movies. It's just harder for me to watch. And so you have mentioned a couple of films before, but this movie in particular, are there any films that reading this book you might recommend other people? Say, hey, if you like this book, maybe check out this film, or vice versa. Hey, if you like this particular film, Fade Out is for you.
No, I would just say if you're a fan of mystery and noir in general, of course, being on the spot here, I will come up with absolutely nothing.
It's okay.
But no, it's a neat genre. If you're enjoying reading this story, just do a quick Google search. Great noir movies, and most of the ones on the list will actually be noir.
Oh, yeah, I imagine.
Yeah, and because a lot of people's definitions of noir, people's definitions differ. But as I said, this is
Well, I'll just maybe Breen, you can help out me and the audience in the follow up, because I think one of the main benefits of the floppies is that they actually have like micro essays of noir films. I don't have the floppies. Maybe you do.
I do.
Those will give you kind of like awesome, because I have floppies for Criminal and a few other series, and that's why I try to collect them, because I have this extra material in the end of these like micro essays and illustrations about noir films, and I think those are really valuable because that'll show you maybe where they're getting their inspiration from.
I will keep that in mind for the next stream.
Well, I will throw out a movie. So despite actually that I was listening to the music, I still have not actually seen Hollywoodland. So reading this book kind of makes me want to now because I'm in that vibe. But a movie that I will suggest to people has been a long time favorite of mine. Great movie. Not exactly, I don't even know if I would specifically call it noir. But it's kind of it's influenced by noir for sure. It's not exactly like this, but there's a lot of the flavor, and that is LA Confidential. If you guys haven't seen that movie, it's a Kevin Spacey film. It's got an early appearance of what's his name? Gladiator. Russell Crowe before anyone knew who he was. I don't even think he's a headline actor on there. Great Hollywood crime story. Takes place roughly in a similar era. And
the actress that absolutely looks the most like a 40s starlet in modern times, Kim Basinger.
Yeah.
And Ash, as much as I'd rather gargle with turpentine than give you the credit you deserve, great movie.
There you go. And if Breen likes it, I'm not high for once.
And it takes a lot for me to like this particular comic because, as Ash knows, I hate indies. If anybody hadn't seen LA Confidential, rectify that. It's a phenomenal movie.
I will rectify that. I like Kevin. I mean, I think Kevin Spacey's creepy as hell these days, but he's a good actor, so I'll check that out.
Yeah, kind of coincidental. We're talking about the seedy underbelly of Hollywood, and then it's a movie that has Kevin Spacey, who's kind of a real life example of yeah. So, anyone else have any other movie recommendations or anything that
I'll just repeat it. Inherent Vice, directed by Paul Thomas Anderson, starring Joaquin Phoenix, who's also in Gladiator, Owen Wilson, Reese Witherspoon, and many others. It's a kind of like a comedy noir similar to Big Lebowski, but it's very clear that Ed Brubaker has read the source material, which are novels by Thomas Pynchon.
I like P.T. Anderson. I want to see that movie.
Actually, the first time I ever bought DVDs new, I bought North by Northwest and LA Confidential.
There we go.
I mean, if you guys watch it and like it, I'll do a movie cast. You know.
You talking about the? Yeah. I'm always game for that stuff. Skip, did you have any movie recommendations or anything that you felt was inspired by this, or vice versa, or?
Yeah, mine was more so not as much not as much as what like inspired it, or or whatever, but kind of to the first thing that was mentioned, like if you like this movie, you'll probably also like this book. You already mentioned LA Confidential. That was the very first thing that came to, or excuse me, actually that was the second thing that came to mind. So let's say LA Confidential is more on the serious side of things, and let's say the darker side of things. If we take one from the lighter side of things, I would say Caesar by the Coen brothers.
Oh,
very much about like the same thing, same time period, very much about like the studio system and whatnot, and had speaking of
I thought of it during the stream, but it wasn't appropriate to bring up because it shows that movie's so self-referential because it's these Jewish directors, but in the movie they show this conspiracy of Jewish communists actually like conspiring to influence all the movies. So it's like very much, I don't know what to take from that.
Exactly. There you go.
Well, Caesar's been on my radar.
And on the brighter side.
That's been on my radar for a long. That's the Coen brothers film, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. I kind of dismissed that a long time ago, and now maybe I'll reconsider it because.
Isn't it called Hail Caesar?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, Hail Caesar. Yeah. It was on mine too. It was one of those, like, I like the Coen brothers, but I looked at it and I was just like, if I go see this movie at all, it's going to be because Scarlett Johansson is in it in a Coen brothers movie. So, but I held off, and then I needed a movie that I hadn't seen at the movies that time for a date. So I was just like, all right, well, I got to go see something. And I wasn't really excited about going on this date with this person. I gave her my word. So we were going to, so I was like, all right, well, I need to have a personal stake in it. So I was like, okay, well, at least let me knock this off the list. And I walked away, like, first third of that movie, I didn't know what to think. By the time it was over, I walked away and I was just like, I don't know how the Coen brothers do it. But and shout out to Comic Quirks, Jimmy. Comic Quirks was Jimmy in the chat. He and I watched Barton Fink together Until I Fall Asleep, which is another movie about a writer in this kind of time period and all that stuff.
Don't even mention that movie. I don't want to hear it.
Well, Barton Fink?
That just is like, I don't want to think about that movie. Just stop talking about it. Let's wrap this up.
Can we talk about Deliverance then?
No one should ever talk about Deliverance.
Anyway, yeah, Coen brothers, and then anything with the Coen brothers and them talking about the film industry is a good way to go. I have not seen Suburbicon
It's weird as well. Like, it's not their best, but like, I hate people who write bad reviews about that movie because it's like, it's something.
I'm gonna watch it now.
All right, ladies and gents, we're about the 90-minute mark, and it's time to wrap this thing up. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to be doing parts 2 and 3 of this. Hopefully you've been reading along with us, or if you haven't, hopefully we've inspired you to jump on this. All 3 volumes of this are available on Comixology, so if you're not necessarily wanting to go out and invest in 3 trades at the moment, you can get them on Comixology Unlimited. That's where I got mine. I'm still trying to find a hard copy of the complete edition. It's very expensive. I hope it comes back.
Yeah. I paid top dollar.
I hope it comes back into print so I don't have to do that. Speaking of which, though, I did get in the mail today my Criminal Deluxe Edition Volume 1, which that thing is a nice, big, thick beast. I'm very pleased. Came in great condition. And
yeah, I just recently got 1, 2, and 3 in the last 3 weeks.
I'm just missing number 2 now, so I got to find a number 2.
I think Skip found that for me and Mel bought it for me. Well, I paid for it, but he sent it my way.
Skip is a good guy like that. So that's my news for the day. Does anyone have any final things that they just want to share before we exit?
I just think that I'm fading out and my internet privileges are being pulled at the prison.
I see what you did there.
I love this damn book. Read it with us, please. It's great.
Hell yeah.
Is no one gonna mention ladies love the biggin?
I was trying not to mention that one. All right, guys. Everyone, thank you so much for watching. Are we going to be doing this next Wednesday or in 2 weeks, guys?
I vote 2 weeks personally, but
I'm 2 weeks also if I have a vote.
All right. So in 2 weeks, 2 weeks, come back and join us on Wednesday, approximately the same time. We're going to be doing volume 2 and read the books. Don't just let us spoil them for you. It's way better this way. Trust me. This is some of the best stuff that's out there. And you can stop complaining that there's no good comics. All right. Take care, everyone.
Good night, kids.
bye.
Later.